in to see it. So personally, I like to keep my 4K monitor around about 1.5. Since this is a tutorial, I'll make it nice and big so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so that's orbiting around with the middle mouse button. If we want to zoom in, we can do that just by scrolling in and out. We can also do it by going up to the magnifying glass tool there. Okay, so that one you kind of have to like squint in to see it. So personally, I like to keep my 4K monitor around about 1.5. Since this is a tutorial, I'll make it nice and big so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so that's orbiting around with the middle mouse button. If we want to zoom in, we can do that just by scrolling in and out. We can also do it by going up to the magnifying glass tool there, and then just left click dragging and then moving the mouse back and forth. That does the same thing. Or you could hold down Control and the middle mouse button, and that will do a smooth zoom as well. Okay, so one thing you might notice looking at this is that it's not very pretty, right? It's just kind of got this flat, bland, gray lighting over everything. And that's because this state right now is called viewport shading. And it's kind of a lightweight, optimized way to view the scene just as you're building it. But if you want to create a final pretty image, that's called rendering. And you can actually switch into render mode by going up here into the top right-hand corner. You can see we're currently in the viewport shading mode. If we go to across, you should see render view mode. So if we click that, your computer might stall for a quick second whilst it loads it in. You can see it's now different. We have directional light. We have shadow cast across the monkey. So it's now currently being lit by this lamp up here. So if I wanted to, zoom in on that lamp and just kind of like move it around, you can see it's kind of hard to focus on. Like it's always exactly not in the right view. And that's because we are centered on our monkey right now. We need to change the focus. We need to pan to something else. So we can do that one of two ways. One, if you're on a laptop, you could use a little move tool there. That will do that. Or everyone else, shift, middle mouse click, drag. That will do the same thing. So middle mouse is for orbit. So you could use a little move tool there. That will do that. Or everyone else, shift, middle mouse click, drag. That will do the same thing. So middle mouse is for orbiting. Shift middle mouse is for pan to change your view to something else. Okay, so I want to move my light because it's too moody. I won't be able to see the monkey's face there. So to move an object, you could do it one of two ways. One, you could go over to the left-hand corner here and you've got the move tool. When you click that, you can see that the selected object, to move an object, you could do it, change your view to something else. Okay, so I want to move my light because it's too moody. I won't be able to see the monkey's face there. So to move an object, you could do it one of two ways. One, you could go over to the left-hand corner here and you've got the move tool. When you click that, you can see that the selected object, the lamp, has this this gizmo, it's called, with these axes on it. And if I just clicked and dragged on any of those arrows there, you can see I can move it along any of those axes. I can also just click on that white circle there, and that will just freehand drag it depending on my view. But it's kind of tedious. Every time you want to move something, you have to like go to that tool and then find the arrows and yada yada. So actually, most people in Blender prefer to use the hotkey. So we just keep it in the default selection state here, and instead remember the hotkey, which is G for grab. Now I just tapped the key, and you'll notice as I move my cursor, that it's now attached to my cursor. It's not, my cursor isn't even actually close to it. In fact, my cursor could be on the other side of the screen and I could tap G and it will move it. And at first this is kind of awkward. You're like, why is it working this way? But once you get used to it, you realize it's actually handy because you don't have to spend all this time like navigating your cursor to something just so that you can move it. Your cursor could be over here and then just tap it and you're moving it. So whilst you're in this move state, if you want to cancel a movement, you can do it one of two ways. You could just hit escape or you could right click. Then if you want to confirm a movement, like say I want to move my lamp here and I like the movement, I can just do a single left click. So again, if I want to cancel something, just right click. If I want to confirm the movement, movement, left click. But let's say I wanted to move it along an axis, like, I like these arrows here and I want to be able to move it on just a specific axis. Well, I can do that whilst I'm in that grab state as well. So after I've hit the G key to grab it, I can then tap the letter of the axis that I want to move it on. So if you don't know, in the real world and in the 3D software, there are 3 axes because there's 3 dimensions. There's the X axis, which I can move by hitting the X key, the Y axis to move it back and forth along the Y axis with the Y key, or the Z axis to move it up and down on the Z axis. So you can remember those letters, the X, Y, and Z, or the method that I actually prefer to use is whilst in that G state, if you just hold down the middle mouse button and then pull out, you can see you get this like gray line that pulls out from the center. And then if you just drag out and move around, it will snap it to the nearest axis, which again is maybe an odd way to work, but it's actually really handy because it means you don't have to think of the letter and locate it on your keyboard. I can just tap G to move it and then middle mouse drag out and then just find that exact axis that I'm looking for. And so it's very fast to just quickly move the lamp exactly where I want it. By the way, if you're finding it hard to remember all of the keyboard shortcuts that I mentioned, I've actually put together a PDF, a cheat sheet of Blender's most common hotkeys, and you can download that by clicking the link in the description. So you could print it out or you could just have it on a separate monitor while you work. Also, if you are from another 3D software package, you might notice that Blender's hotkeys are different than what you are used to. So if you actually go to preferences, just for those people that are from other softwares, if you change the key map to industry compatible, you'll find that these shortcuts are probably more in line with what you remember from other software. I'll also put a link to a cheat sheet that is just for the industry compatible key maps that somebody else put together. I've got nothing to do with it, but I'll put that link there so you can check it out as well. For the rest of this tutorial series, I'm going to use Blender's hotkeys. Just keep that in mind. Now let's say, as I am moving around here, I'm like, oh, this looks really good. I've got some nice Rembrandt lighting across the monkey's face. I want to take a photo. I want to take a nice pretty image of this and post it on socials for clout, right? Well, I could take a screenshot of it, but that would be silly because it's got all these lines all over. It's all noisy, right? We don't like it. The way you take a photo, a pretty image in Blender, is to do a render. So you can do that one of 2 ways, by going up to render and hitting render image, or remembering the hotkey which says next to it F12. So when you do that, a little window will pop up. It will use your CPU or GPU, depending on which render you've got active, and it will render out a pretty image. And from here, you could go image and then save as, and I'll save it as a PNG or whatever, wherever you want to save it. But you might notice looking at this, that this is actually a different view than what we have here, right? So here I've got a nice view of the monkey's face, but there is a different view. And the reason for that is when you do a render, it's not rendering from the view that you're looking at currently. It's always going to render from the point of view of the camera. So this is our camera over here, and it's looking from this angle. And we can actually look through the camera by just clicking the little camera icon there, or by remembering the hotkey, which is no. So this is our camera over here, and it's looking from this angle. And we can actually look rendering from the view that you're looking at currently. It's always going to render from the point of view of the camera. So this is our camera over here, and it's looking from this angle. And we can actually look through the camera by just clicking the little camera icon there, or by remembering the hotkey, which is number pad 0.
Introducing Grammarly like you've never seen before, your all-in-one writing essential. This is Paraphraser, your go-to tool for writing that's sharp, clear, and ready for whatever hat you put on. It works like this. Here are some notes from a busy meeting.
So how do we move the camera? Well, Blender's a little awkward, a little different to other software packages, but you're supposed to like hit G to move it and then like middle mouse to zoom in and out. And then if you want to like move along an axis, I guess G and then X. You could do that, but actually what a lot of users prefer, especially those from other software packages, is if you've got your camera selected, which by the way, I haven't mentioned this, but up here, this is your outliner. It's kind of an inventory of every item that you've got in your scene. Okay, so with the camera there selected, if I hit N is to bring up the properties, N for properties for whatever reason, and then go to view, there's a little box there that just says lock to camera to view. So now with that active, if I just use the same keyboard shortcuts as before, middle mouse button to orbit around, shift middle mouse to drag it, you can see that the camera is moving with it. So essentially essentially the view active, if I just use the same keyboard shortcuts as before, middle mouse button to box there that just says N. N is to bring up the properties, N for properties for whatever reason, and then go to view. There's a little box there that just says lock to camera to view. So now with that active, if I just use the same keyboard shortcuts as before, middle mouse button to orbit around, shift middle mouse to drag it, you can see that the camera is moving with it. So essentially the view, I can set it up exactly as I want, then hit N again, and then I can disable that. And then now as I pull out, you can see the camera will stay exactly where it was, and I could do a lovely, pretty render. But this is too simple. If we post this on the internet, people are bound to make fun of us. Imagine that. Well, we could give it some color, right? So with our monkey head selected, we can go over here to the properties. So this property section is where you might spend the other, I don't know, another 5 to 8%, I'm not getting too exact there. You might spend another 5% of your time in this section, but it's where all of the properties for things are in Blender. So for example, you've got like the render properties, like the size of the image that you're saving something as is defined there. And some of these properties will stay here no matter what is selected, but others are selection dependent. So you can see actually if I click the camera there, you can see I get a little camera tab at the bottom there. But if I select my monkey, you'll see the camera tab disappears, but instead I have some other ones that appear. So one that we might want to change is underneath material, and this will enable us to add a material, change the color to something else, essentially. So underneath here, where it's got new, I'm just going to hit new, and then you've got a bunch of options, very confusing. Ooh, IOR. Subsurface. Again, don't worry about it. We'll get up to all that later on. The one that defines the color is the base color. So if I do a single left click on that white box there, I can then change this color to whatever I want. I could make it an odd, creepy, skin-toned monkey head, right? Like that, and do a render. Okay, so hey, all right, it's better, but still, it's too simple. I think people will think we haven't put enough effort into this masterpiece. So let's add another object. Let's give the monkey a hat. So if we want to add another object, how do we do it? Well, we could go to the add menu, like I mentioned before, or the hotkey, Shift A. So what sort of hat do we want to add? We could do a boxy hat. Let's do a party hat with a cone. So once we've added that object, you can see it's just plopped it straight in the center, intersecting our monkey. So we need to move it. We move it, and we can grab it with the G key. So it's now moving it just on our cursor there. I don't want to move it just freehand though, because I like the position, but I just want to move it up. So I'm going to hit Z to move it along the Z axis. Right, I like it there. So once I like the placement, I'm just going to do a single left click. Okay. Okay, great. But too big. Oh, so see, you need to learn another tool, which is scale. So we could go to the scale tool there, and then we get this familiar little axes there. But again, most people prefer to remember the hotkey, which for scale is just S. So S to scale. So resizing that. Okay, that's pretty good. Let's move it again. Most people prefer to remember the hotkey, which for scale is just S. We could go to the scale tool there, and then we get this familiar little axes there. But again, most people prefer to remember the hotkey, which for scale is just S. So S to scale. So resizing that. Okay, that's pretty good. Let's move it down again. So G and Z. Okay. All right. But yeah, let's say we want to make it a little taller. Okay, so we could scale it along just the Z axis. So S and then Z. Whoops. S, Z. There we go. And it's now making it a tall party hat that, scale it down. There we go. Ha, look at that. You're a very bland party if it's grayless. Let's give it another material, an exciting color, a vibrant aqua color. Why not? Give that a render by hitting F12. Okay, camera is in the wrong position, so let's go to camera view mode with number pad 0. I'm going to select my camera, and rather than dabbling with that little thing I had before, I'm going to hit G, and then middle mouse, just tap it once. As I said, it's a little awkward. Blender's the way it handles with the camera, but anyway, just move that out, and then I got to rotate it. All right, so I'm going to rotate. So with the camera selected, tap R, and middle mouse, and it's now kind of like freehand rotating around. So I'll just move it up slightly. There we go. Okay, this is just a fool around session, so don't worry if you're making mistakes. We'll get to actual practical building stuff in the next part. I'm just trying to find ways to throw in these like fundamental tools. Rotate, right? So the monkey's head is just, he needs to look dead on at the camera and currently he's off. Ah, what an excuse to use the rotate tool. So you could enable the rotate tool, right? The familiar axis there. You could click and rotate it around like that. Again, most people prefer to remember the hotkey, which is R to rotate, right? So it's now just freehand rotating on my cursor. Remember the axes, as I mentioned before, can be used for any mode. So the X axis will rotate back and forth, the Y axis, tilt it, or Z. There we go, to turn it towards the camera. Just a little bit, right? And there you go, F12. And we've done it. Let's save it. Let's upload it to ArtStation and then just wait for the recruiters, essentially. All right, let's start a new scene so that we can get ready for part 2, where we're going to actually start building our donut and learning some of the more core features of Blender. Now we know how Blender functions. Let's start building that donut. So as before, let's, well, first of all, just to repeat, make sure you're working with a new scene. Completely new scene, don't want any remaining monkey heads lying around. Let's begin a fresh slate, and let's delete our default cube, just with the delete key, and let's replace it with a new object. You might remember the hotkey for that is Shift-A. And as I mentioned before, you usually want what is underneath mesh, because these are your primitives. So we want to start with something that most resembles what it is we're building. If it was a house, you might start with a cube. If it was a vase, you might start with a cylinder. In our case, we want the donut-shaped one, although mathematicians call it a torus for some reason. So let's add that. Now, if I zoom in by scrolling up, you can see we have something resembling a donut. Looks like a pretty weak-looking donut, you know, very flimsy. Looks like the donut before it's cooked when they just drop it into the vat, and it's just this little wispy thing. So immediately after you do some actions in Blender, you have options to change it. And the options are hidden down here in the bottom left-hand corner. You see a little box. And if you click that box, you see options. And look, we can change the dimensions of our torus. Now, something to note is that these options in Blender only appear immediately after you have done that action. If you do another action with the dimensions of our torus, change it. And the options are hidden down here in the bottom left-hand corner. You see a little box. And if you click that box, you see options. And look, we can change the dimension. Have options to change it. And the options are hidden down here in the bottom left-hand corner. You see a little box. And if you click that box, you see options. And look, we can some actions in Blender. You have options to change it. And the options are hidden down here in the bottom left-hand corner. You see a little box. And if you click that box, you see options. And look, we can change the dimensions of our torus. Now, something to note is that these options in Blender only appear immediately after you have done that action. If you do another action, like say deselect your torus by mistake, it's not, right? Because Blender has assumed you have moved on. You've accepted the state of your donut. Another action, like say deselect your torus by mistake, it's not, right? Because Blender has assumed you have moved on. You've accepted the state of your donut, and this is the one you want, right? Now, if you haven't done anything drastic or changed this object in some severe way, you can temporarily bring it back by hitting F9. I never actually remember that hotkey. I just remember that immediately after I have added an object, if I want to tweak it, now's my chance before I move on to something else. Okay, so we can change, the size of it here. We can also change the resolution. I'll use the term resolution. Loosely, to make it higher or lower fidelity. And a mistake that a lot of beginners make, and I say this because this was the exact mistake I made way back in 2003 when I started learning Blender, is they go, well, I need a realistic looking donut, so I guess I need to go really high resolution. I remember my first project, one of my first projects was for a high school film project, and I wanted to have a close-up of a face. Didn't realize faces were going to be difficult, but I went really high poly, and then it was just an absolute nightmare to work with. So the reason you don't want this is that, for starters, things that are high poly are very slow to render, and they're very hard to work with if you want to tweak the shape of it. But also, as you learn and you grow with 3D, you'll discover that it is a lot easier to add resolution to something later on, but it's very difficult to take it away if you've already built it into it and you don't need it. So, long way to say, what we actually want is to have as few polys, these are called polys, as you can get away with. So I'm going to go with 32 major and 12 minor. And don't worry that it looks all jagged, because we will fix that in a moment. Now, the major and minor, this is really up to you, but I find that something that looks kind of chunky, like a fat donut, just looks really delicious. So I'm going with something around about this size, okay? And once I'm happy with this, once I'm ready to click off, I click off, the options are gone, and this is it. This is the donut that I am now working with. So how do we make this look higher resolution, less jagged? Well, one way is to use smooth shading. So if you right-click with your object selected, go to Shade Smooth. And look at that, this is immediately better. Without getting too technical, so if you right-click with your object selected, go to Shade Smooth. And look at that, this is immediately better. Without getting too technical, this is kind of a fakery. It's sort of like the shader is telling the renderer that this is a really high poly dense mesh when it really isn't. It's just basically kind of like averaging out faces, and anyway, it's very technical, but basically you're not going to add anything to your render time, but it's going to look smoother. And so this is generally what you want for something that is smooth and organic looking like we want. If you were rendering like architectural or like hard surfaces, like later on we're going to put this on a counter, then the object would obviously want to be flat. But in our case, we're just going to use Shade Smooth. But you might notice that looking at this, especially if you go side on, that you've got this sort of a jagged shape around here, right? So the silhouette is really breaking that illusion that this is a high poly or a smooth looking donut. But thankfully, rather than adding all of that complex density into the mesh itself and then making it hard to remove later on, there's another way through modifiers. So if we go over here to our properties, right, this very confusing, lots of option looking properties, click on the wrench, and this is the section called modifiers. And this is one of those object-dependent things. So if you've got your camera selected, you won't see it. So it's only when you've got actual meshes that you might see this modifier here. So it's much easier to explain if we just add one. So up here, add modifier, and you've got a range of options here that can do a whole number of things. The one we're looking for is underneath generate, and it is called subdivision surface. And it is a really common modifier that you use all the time. In fact, it's so common, it's actually, you can just immediately add it to any object by hitting Control-1. But don't do that because we've already got it, so there. Now, some of you might have just discovered that your donut has disappeared. If that is the case, you need to go to Edit, Preferences, and then underneath Viewport, where it's got Subdivision at the very bottom, disable GPU subdivision. That will then make the subdivision perform on your CPU instead of your GPU, which is maybe non-existent or not performing, whatever. But disable that and it should appear. But if it's already working for you, don't disable it, keep it going because GPU will be faster. So what exactly is this doing? Well, it's a lot easier to explain if we look at the shade flat mode, because I'm not being tricked by the smooth shading there. If I set this levels viewport to 0, this is our original mesh. This is before we add the subsurface essentially. When we increase this, you can see that it is adding resolution to our mesh. And the more I